Welcome to Sunday morning Bible study at the Central Church of Christ. We're glad to have you here. Some announcements. Evangelism card writing team 6 will be meeting this evening after services over in the library. During the months of September through November, there will be a men's leadership class that will be taught. We'll be focusing on developing leadership traits and skills, and there is a sign-up sheet on the bulletin board. Let me encourage you to think about being a part of that class. Uh, if you are like I am at all in that area, and like I perceive most guys to be, that would be something you might be inclined to avoid. I'm of the Moses school. I've always had a lot of admiration for Moses because when God asked him to, well, he didn't really ask him. He said, Moses, you're going to do it. You're the man. But when Moses was approached, you remember Moses gave all kinds of excuses, and that would be me. You know, I don't need to do this. I don't need to do this. I shouldn't. I'm not the one. And I don't speak real well and all that stuff. And finally, God basically said, "Shut up, Moses. Do the job. I've been preparing you for this for years. From the time you were a baby, you were mine, and I have a plan for you, and it's not an accident that you grew up in Pharaoh's house, and now get on with it." But Moses was an excuse giver. Contrast that with Isaiah. Here am I, send me. You know, Isaiah is not me, and I get that. I'm more like the excuse giver Moses. But I really urge you, if you are old enough to be a Christian, you are old enough to be in that class. You may not think of yourself as a leader, but let me put a big plug in for that class and encourage you to do it. I really don't know exactly what the topics are going to be or how the teaching of that is going to line out, who is going to be involved in that. But I just know that God's kingdom always needs a steady stream of leaders. And if you don't do it, who's gonna? Somebody needs to do the job. In sort of a companion announcement, Wednesday night invitations. The elders are asking any of our baptized men and young men to give a 3 to 5 minute devotional at the conclusion of services during the months of September through November. And again, there's a sign-up sheet for that. Again, I put in a plug for doing this. Sign up for it. You can do this. If you think you can't or you're shaky on it and you need some help, there are bunches of guys here. I'll tell you one, me. I will help you. There are bukus of other guys around here that would be glad to do that too. 3 to 5 minutes may seem like 3 to 5 years when you think about it in advance. But when you get up there, believe me, it's more like 3 to 5 seconds. You can do this, and it's a good start. You don't have a hostile audience. You've got people here who love you and know you and care for you and are really willing to support you in every effort that you might make to try to grow. Please consider that. Please think about doing it. Don't I'm not going to sign up for it. You hear enough of me. This is a slot that really ought to be filled by guys that we don't hear much of. Don't leave those gaps up there to be filled by us because you won't do what you need to do. Please consider that. There's a teacher appreciations dinner on Thursday, September the 19th at 6 p.m. at Renee's Event Center. This is for all teachers and their spouses or plus one. Deadline to sign up is Wednesday, September the 11th. There are sign-up sheets also on the youth bulletin board if you'd be willing to host one of the Sunday evening devos or provide food for the bi-weekly Teens in the Word devos during the winter months. It's school time again, and Bread of Life is collecting school supply kits. The items needed are listed on the bulletin board and in the daily updates. Deadline to donate is Wednesday, September the 4th. Again, please consider the opportunities that you have to grow. Be turning with me, please, to Proverbs chapter 21. If you're visiting with us, we're wrapping up a study. If all goes according to plan, next Sunday will be our last Sunday in this study. We've been looking at lessons from the book of Proverbs. Proverbs is a very intense study with virtually every verse having a major lesson, a life lesson that we can benefit from. So we've not been making any attempt at all to try to go verse by verse. But what we are doing at this particular phase is taking select verses and examining them as just a sample, just one of those cores like a driller might do, searching for oil or something like that, to just sort of be able to see the riches of what the book contains. And if it appears that we're going backwards, in a sense we are, because when we get through with looking at some verses in 21, we'll go to 20. We're never going to make it all the way back to the start. Obviously, that's not our intention, but I just want you to be able to get some samples from various parts of the book, and we already spent quite a bit of time on the prologue of Proverbs, so that's why we're doing it this way. Call your attention to some verses from Proverbs that are great life lessons for us. And the first one that we'll look at from chapter 21 is verse 5. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. There's a reminder here to us in this verse to not get in too big a stir. You've seen people that just, they jump on their horse and ride off in all directions. You probably have worked with people like that on the job sometimes. Maybe you've been on a team with them where this is their approach and they mean well, but they're not beneficial to themselves or anyone else around them. The idea here is that the diligent do have plans, and that tends to be far more productive than someone that's just flying by the seat of their pants. Okay, I'm going to make it up as I go along, but let's just jump in there and let's just try this. That's not a good way for living your life according to the wise man of Proverbs. There's the need for patience. It sort of reminds me of the fable of the tortoise and the hare. You can, in the end, slow and steady gets it. And I've seen that in practice, even as a boy working at the first jobs that were paying jobs that I ever had. I would watch how these men would pace themselves all through a day to get the job done. They weren't sloughing off. They just worked at it steadily. And almost invariably, newcomers were one of two types. They were the kind of type that basically didn't do anything and hoped they would get a paycheck before they ended up getting fired. Or they went in there trying to impress and they worked, like my father used to say, like they were fighting fire, and they would burn out and have to learn to adapt. Slow and steady is a good motto for how we need to approach life in general. Look with me at verse 13. Whoever closes his ear to the cry of the poor will himself call out and not be answered. One of the themes of the scriptures is you reap what you sow. That's true in this life to a degree. It's also true eternally. We need to be really attuned to those around us that have needs. This is probably one of the most difficult aspects of life, though. I remember years and years ago talking with a couple of men from other areas outside our general area of Western Kentucky. How do you deal with people in the benevolent program? Every single one of them acknowledged that there is a difficulty with the folks that want to come around and basically they make the circuit. Anybody that's been involved in that ministry understands how that works. You have the people that are genuinely in need that just basically need to be able to have a foothold to move forward. And then you have others that milk the system. Okay, that's the way it's always going to be. You just have to figure out some way or another that you're going to deal with that. But on an individual level, we need to think about the idea of paying attention and doing what we can for the poor. I've mentioned that almost every proverb that we look at, we could find a New Testament backup for it. That if you were inclined, and I know you're not, but if you were inclined to argue, okay, this is Old Testament, it doesn't apply to us. Virtually every one of these has a New Testament counterpart. And let's just take this one to illustrate the point. Flip over with me to 1 John. 1st and 2nd and 3rd John, Jude, and Revelation. Chapter 3. The verse that I would like for us to look at for a moment is just verse 17. Basically, it's the commentary on the proverb that we've just been looking at. But if anyone has this world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? And then verse 18, little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and truth. Basically, talk's cheap. If you see somebody that needs something and you can do something about it, then we're commanded to do that. In doing so, we're demonstrating one of God's characteristics. We're more godlike. Goodness knows that on our very best day, we're going to fall way short of being like God. But the goal is to strive to be godlike in our conduct. And God loves, and God cares. And Jesus on earth again and again noticed people who had needs. And he didn't only notice their spiritual needs, which was his primary target, but he also noticed physical needs and attempted to take care of those. Very first miracle, the wedding feast at Cana, that miracle involved a physical, I wouldn't necessarily say need, but it was definitely something that was handy for at least under the circumstances when the water jugs were brought in and turned to wine for the wedding feast to continue. As he walked about his way teaching people, he noticed people who had physical ailments and infirmities and had circumstances. And you didn't have to be Goliath for him to notice you either. As the little children sing, the wee little man Zacchaeus up in a tree was someone he noticed that he paid attention to. And so we need to pay attention as well in this area. Look at verse 15 with me. When justice is done, it is a joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. That's quite a contrast. We live in a culture that is a culture of contrast. This is definitely true. People, even that are not godly particularly, that are not particularly religious, they want to see justice done, and that is a pleasure to them. We're not talking about the justice of the Old West where a guy gets lynched. We're talking about just, okay, we want things to be done right and proper. That's what that shopkeeper in a big city is wanting when customers come into his store. He doesn't want to see a mob of looters running through there, yanking stuff off the shelf and then running out the door, knowing full well that an undermanned police department is not going to be able to make the call. And if they do arrest somebody, that some far out attorney general is never going to prosecute them anyway. And if they do, they're going to be turned loose without any bail, and that he'll see them next week, if not sooner. Godly person wants justice. But when justice is done, it's a terror to those who are evil because they know that there are going to be consequences for their actions. That's another thing that's being said in this proverb. It's amazing, again, when we look at these undercurrents of threads. Actions have consequences. Let's look at verse 17. Whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. Now, that might require a little bit of explaining based on the translation that I'm reading from, because the idea of whoever loves pleasure, I'm not sure what the reading is for yours, but that Hebrew word love is talking about excessive or uncontrolled indulgence. So somebody that goes overboard in their life just centers around pleasure, that person is going to be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil, those were like symbols in biblical times of wealth. Those who had plenty of both of these were generally quite well off. You know, I'm thinking about the idea of being a poor man who loves pleasure will be a poor man. He's going to be poor in his pocketbook. He's going to be poor in his intellect. He's going to be poor in his soul. His focus is altogether in the wrong place. It makes me think a little bit of a pro athlete, maybe somebody who's never had very much money at all, and all of a sudden they have this big fortune. They have maybe millions of dollars, and you think, man, they're fixed for life. They'll they can really be anything they really need is available to them that money can buy, and just about anything they want. And yet, over and over and over again, we see those people come into poverty. They can't handle the money. The big lottery winner. I have read statistics about how lottery winners turn out, and generally it is not very good. They just really can't handle the money, the finances, and they tend to blow it. You know, after all, how many Lamborghinis can you drive at one time? Yeah, yeah. It may be an ego trip to have 15 of them sitting out there on the driveway, but after a while, that just doesn't work out so well. So we have to kind of keep that in mind. And how many buddies, and we'll look at that one in a proverb later on, probably this class period. But how many of your buddies do you need to have? Do you need to buy houses for? It's one thing. A lot of times you'll see an athlete when they get their paycheck, and they'll say, "Okay, I'm going to buy Mama a house." That's kind of not what we're talking about. But just throwing money away. Whoever loves pleasure, they love that big lifestyle. will become a poor man. That's just, we've seen that happen. Uh, Forgive me for a very, very, very dated illustration. I shouldn't even use one that's as dated as this. But one of the greatest heavyweight boxers of all time, and I'm not a boxing fan, but I do know the name Joe Louis. And Joe Louis made lots of big money for his day. And he died impoverished because he just was not good at managing his money. I remember a pro athlete whose name, if I mentioned, many of you would recognize. And when he first started his pro career, before he'd made the big time, I spoke with him and I said, one of the first things you need to do as far as money goes is find you a good financial advisor and not worry about spending all this money. You've got more than enough money to spend and live very well. But start managing your money and sticking it back, because pro athletes have a very short lifespan at best. I don't know whether from me or not, but I think he took that advice and followed up on it. We need to take that advice in our daily lives. It just needs to be a part of our routine. Look at verse 21. Whoever pursues righteousness and kindness will find life, righteousness, and honor. It's sort of a contrast to the one we just looked at. One guy's pursuing pleasure, and this guy's pursuing something else. He's pursuing righteousness and kindness. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, and that'll be fine. But I am of the belief that seekers find. Seek and you will find, I think, can be taken literally. I really believe that someone who is a genuine seeker of the truth, the scriptural truth, if they are a genuine seeker, you may disagree, but I believe God will place someone in their path just like he did to Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. I still think that concept applies today. I'm not talking about a good person. I'm not talking about someone who basically has a Bible and they read it. No, I'm talking about someone who is that word seek doesn't mean just kind of glance or look. That means somebody that's going after it. Yeah, they're going after it. Well, this person that we're looking at here is a seeker of righteousness and kindness. And what are they going to find? Do you notice that right in the middle, if they're seeking righteousness, they're going to get it? Right in the middle. But they're also, beyond that, they're going to get life and honor. And so sometimes we reap more than we sow. As a general rule, I think that's a lesson of life, isn't it? I believe if you just stuck a grain of corn in the ground, you're probably going to get more than one grain back, right? You know, at the very least, you're going to get a stalk and several ears on that stalk, and each ear is going to have a multiplicity. Look how God does things. You know, one of the marvels. So whoever pursues righteousness and kindness is going to get it in abundance. Look at verse 23, please. Whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble. There is an entire book in the New Testament. I'm guessing you already know what I'm thinking. The book of James. Over and over again in the book of James. What shall I compare the tongue to? It's like a fire, a consuming fire. It's like one of those raging forest fires that's out of control. It's like a big stallion that's out of control and you can't put a bridle on them. You can't rein them in. They're just on a rampage. Whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble. The safety of the prudent tongue. I would say that everyone in here, I don't see any little babies. Everyone in here has had mouth problems before, at one time or another. That we've said things we wish we hadn't, that there have been times when we should have said stuff and we didn't. It is one of the most difficult aspects of life to be able to control your tongue. Verse 30. No wisdom, no understanding, no counsel can avail against the Lord. In Corinthians, we're reminded about the difference between the wisdom of the world and the wisdom of God. There is no wisdom. There are no counselors who can stand up against God. The first thing that ran through my mind when I read this verse as I was trying to prepare for class again is it made me think of Egypt. I'm thinking, okay, Egypt was the superpower of the day. They were known for their wisdom. They were known for their scholars. They had the best of knowledge of that era. So when they went up against God, how did that turn out for them? Even when they, and I don't know how this happened. Moses throws down his rod, all of a sudden it's a snake. The wise men of Egypt say, no big deal. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. They made snakes appear too. Interesting little twist on that story though. God's snake devoured theirs. I'd say everybody in that room learned the lesson right there. They got the message. Babylon, we still use stuff from the Babylonians. Isn't it weird that we use things like 12 and 24 for measuring time and 60 seconds and all of that? That's all Babylonian stuff. We're still using it. I think they would look at our era if they could be transported into it, and they'd be amazed at all the stuff. But I think one of the more observant of them would probably grin and say, they feel time just like we did. Smart people. So how did it work out for Babylon when they decided to take on God? Okay, for the short term. And they think how great they are and how well they're doing, not understanding that all they are tools in God's hand. And after he is finished with them doing the job that he wanted them to do, then he takes them out. And the Assyrians, I'm not real smart, but I know a little dab about history. There may be an exception that I don't know about or haven't remembered. But I can't think of very many superpowers that once they fall have ever risen again. I think we're in the process of seeing one now. I think the Chinese are there. But when you look at modern Greece and you go through Greece as a tourist, they're not showing you their modern technological accomplishments. They are still living on the past of their ancestors. That's where their money basically comes from, is showing tourists places like the Acropolis and all of those things that go back to that era. The Egyptians are the same way. Mighty Egypt is not so mighty in 2024. And as far as Syria and Babylon, They're desert. They're just what God said they would be, barren as they can be. And while there are civilizations there that are definitely troublesome and have to be watched, like the Iranians and the Iraqis, the reality is, as far as their civilization goes, as far as what they have and what they contribute, that's nothing. We need to be really careful about trying to go up against God and thinking that we can be superior to Him. Let's take a look at 31. You recognize this one. You may have forgotten, or maybe you didn't realize where it came from, but we sing this song. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. There is a place for getting ready. Oh, there is a big place for getting ready. We better be getting ready. But you can make all the preparation you want to in this world for whatever eventuality you think is coming, for the battle, for the struggles of life. You can do all of that, but ultimately, the end result is in God's hands. And the writer of Proverbs reminds us of that. Well, we could have spent time on every one of these Proverbs and we would have been doing well, but let's go on to chapter 20. Let's just start with number 1. It's one of the themes of the book. Wine is a mocker, strong drink a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. That's pretty plain. That almost sounds like Ron. It ain't too smart to be hooked on booze. That's not said nearly as elegantly. But the blunt truth of the matter, the author of Proverbs over and over and over again says, don't let yourself get caught in this. Whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Look at verse 3. It is an honor for a man to keep aloof from strife. The idea there is to stay above it. Don't jump into it. This is not the macho man that says, okay, I'll come in here and I'll be the dominator. I'll clean house here. No, that is not the way to handle it. It is an honor for a man to keep aloof from strife. But every fool, harsh word, but it's used over and over again in Proverbs. Every fool will be quarreling. That word quarreling in Hebrew means showing the teeth, snarling. Tough guy. Or at least they want everybody to think they are. And in any case, such people are dangerous. They may or may not be a serious physical threat to those around them, but they certainly are not conducive to a calm and peaceful and tranquil life. Verse 4. The sluggard does not plow in the autumn. He will seek at harvest and have nothing. One of the themes of the book of Proverbs is, don't be lazy. Work. If you expect something, work for it. The sluggard is sitting around doing nothing. Comes harvest time. How come they got stuff and I don't have no stuff? Duh, as kids might say, if that's not out of date. We get the point though. What do you expect? What do you expect? The lazy expect something for nothing. You know, he'll seek at harvest. He thinks, okay, I ought to have stuff out there. These other guys, that field across the road's got stuff. Where's my stuff? And they have a convenient lapse of memory of seeing that guy out there working and toiling in the sun and the heat, planting, tilling, planting, and tending to the crop. The theme of Proverbs, work. Spiritually speaking, we have a song that some of you will recognize that we never sing anymore. Work, for the night is coming. Basically, in reference to our work as Christians. There will come a time when night has arrived and we won't be able to work anymore. So, work while we can. 6, verse 6. Many a man proclaims his own steadfast love, but a faithful man who can find? Many a man proclaims his own steadfast love. Talk is cheap. It's really not worth very much. Yet it's amazing how many people, especially in our culture, it seems like, would rather listen to flowery nonsense and promises than they had to look at actions. A lot of times people don't do so well with words. But like in this instance of love, they show their love over and over and over and over and over again. And yet that's discounted. Because somebody slick says, oh, I love you. Oh, I love you. Or, oh, I'll provide this. Or, I'll do this for you. Just as a historical footnote, could be wrong. I think a lot of that got really emphasized with the advent of TV. You have to make that slick TV appearance. Whereas, and by the way, I don't want to go back to the days of radio. I like my big screen TVs. There's nothing like watching a nature show on a big screen TV. I think watching a program about wildlife on the radio would be a little somewhat less. But when you can see someone and they've got to have their makeup on, this is men as well as women. This is especially men that are looking for positions, whether it be political or in industry or wherever. And it's been said over and over again that people as homely as Abraham Lincoln would never be elected in today's world. And I suspect that's right. And that's kind of sad. We'd rather have some slick-looking Madison Avenue polished person than we had to have the real thing. And this proverb is warning us against that. Be careful about people who just talk about what they can do and what they will do and all that. Talk's cheap. Reliability is golden. It's golden. Let's take a look at verse 11. Even a child makes himself known by his acts, by whether his conduct is pure and upright. Again, I'm not certain what your translation says. That word child in the original actually refers to an adolescent. We're not talking about maybe like a 5 or 6 year old. We're certainly not talking about a 2 year old. We're talking about someone who has a few years on them. So that person makes themselves known by their acts. Again, we're talking about the importance of actions. I grew up in a small town with a very sheltered and protected upbringing of that era because really a whole town practically raised me. I know you can say, well, they didn't do so hot, but basically I was raised by a whole town. The idea here of someone being a child and being basically pure and upright or the opposite of that was foreign to me. Not that we were all angelic, but we didn't do the serious things. Later on, as a young adult, I looked into the faces and the eyes of kids, and it horrified me in some instances what I saw. And some of you, I'm sorry to say, I don't know which ones you are, but I will guarantee you in this number, some of you are so naive that you still believe that 11 and 12 and 13-year-olds, they're just sweet little children. And you would be right probably 90% of the time. And the other 10% would just as soon blow your head off as to look at you. Try looking at their eyes sometimes. Try looking at the expression on their faces sometimes. I've been around thousands of them. Don't tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. This is one where I do. Even an adolescent, this proverb is saying, by their very actions, those adolescents are the ones that are almost always involved in these school shootings. It's usually not a high school senior. It's usually a middle school kid. That's ugly to think about. And that's a lousy way to end a class. But Proverbs just reminds us of what life is like out there and what we want life to be like and how we need to guide our lives into certain paths and channels for it to be what it needs to be. I'm trying to see if I want to try to get anything else done. I think we'll just leave it right there at that spot. We'll wrap it up next time. Please reconsider if you haven't thought about it seriously for you about the leadership class and the Wednesday night invitations.